Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Independent Producers Organization live showcase. And it's very special. I hope it's going to be a very special program today, but I want to take this opportunity first to tell you about next month. We're going to have the people that organize, the organization people of the Portland Roadster Show. And we hope to have an interview with them next second Wednesday of February, and Miss Oregon also, an interview with her. So if everything goes just right, that's what we'll do for next week. We were expecting the guest to call in today. I want to tell you just a bit about him before he does. He has bicycled across 6 continents, from the Arctic to the South Pole, as well as 8 times across the United States, coast to coast and border to border. In 2005, he bicycled from the Arctic Circle, Norway to Athens, Greece. In 2012, he bicycled coast to coast across America again. And he does this all to provide us with information about the coming population crisis facing America. And so what I hope to do until he calls in and talk some about some of the things that he has worked on. He has scuba dived, and in order to be able to say, you should see what it's like down there. It's incredible because it has all the plastic bags, the credit cards, all kinds of plastic junk in huge balloons or acreages of under the oceans, like out from San Francisco, out from New Orleans, are these huge gobs of stuff that needs to, sooner or later we have to clean it up, because that's what's poisoning the fish that we eat now. I'd like to talk just a little bit about population, overpopulation. The more people there are, the less each person's share must be. Technology can't improve on this, and that includes agriculture. Can't improve on that. We can't both maximize the number of people and satisfy every desire or good of everyone. Practically, biophysical limits dictate we must both stabilize population and make hard choices about which goods are to be sought. Both steps will generate opposition, since many people will have to give up something. The system of welfare insulates individual from bearing the full costs of over-reproducing. When every individual believes or behaves in this manner, commons are quickly filled, degraded, and ruined along with their exploiters. Okay, get this. Remain on course right now to add 100 million immigrants within 30 years. That's a demographic fact, because the 1965 Immigration Reform Act by Teddy Kennedy and Congress. Now, what he's referring to is a major law that Teddy Kennedy was inspired to allow more immigrants to come into this country. I just had a story about Teddy Kennedy. He was asked, I don't know, he had what, 6, 7, 8 children. He said, why do you have so many children? He said, because I can afford them. And the truth is, the earth cannot afford them. The earth cannot afford so many people. So that's why it was wrong to do that, and why we're trying so hard to get people to understand they just can't go on and on with that kind of thing. There's one of the big problems to do with the global greenhouse emissions out of and if you see one pipe with hideous brown color and such coming out, try to imagine millions of them all around the world doing the same thing. We are simply putting the squeeze on the trigger of the gun to our head, and that it just isn't going to work. Worldwide, millions upon millions of smokestacks exhaust billions of tons of chemicals, carbon dioxide and particulate into the air 24/7 every week. These chemicals fall as acid rain on the land and into the ocean. That means on our soil and on the ocean where it will affect the fish that we end up eating. This changes the chemistry of the soil, water, and oceans, and it's deadly. Along with thousands, we have 254 million cars that are always, all of them running and smoking and all these fumes coming out of it. And we have thousands of planes, boats, trains, lawnmowers, snow machines, and other combustion engines which burn fuel all day, every day, it seems like. They exhaust enormous amounts of pollution every second without end. In the United States, millions upon millions of homes, offices, buildings, schools, and factories burn billions of tons of energy to operate the engines of commerce. They also exhaust billions of tons of carbon pollution. And I guess in the news, it's already been that we're trying to not use coal. And I'm not sure what we're going to use, because when people get cold, they're going to say, hey, where's our electricity and our energy and our power? That's going to happen soon enough. And then it adds up to an enormous load on the natural world that cannot be mitigated. Note that the USA houses 319 million people. The rest of the planet carries 7.2 billion humans. And of that, the last 1 billion humans took only 12 years to have that many come to be born. At that point, something must give, and it will. Systems cannot withstand that kind of assault and will collapse. The Earth's average temperature rose 1.4 Fahrenheit over the past century. Scientists project the rise of 2 degrees to 11 degrees Fahrenheit within this century. That's a lot of change, and we would like to think there's something we can do about it. Small changes in the average temperature of the planet translates to large and dangerous shifts in climate and weather. It also transforms our oceans with temperature changes and acidification from carbon infusing with the water. Cities burn millions of gallons of oil and billions of tons of coal in order to keep up with the demand. All that pollution falls back to Earth. It's up in the sky, falls back to the Earth on the soil and in the oceans. That is done in order to keep up with our demands for electricity. It devastates the ecology of the planet. Previously to the Industrial Revolution, the Earth's atmosphere carried 280 parts per million of carbon dioxide. In March of 2013, that figure rose to over 400 parts per million for the first time in millions of years. Since that time, oil, gas, and coal became the energy sources that overwhelm the natural world's ability to mitigate that impact. The natural world means the world of insects and animals and things that just grow and live everywhere. That's the natural world, and when we interfere with that, like we are trying to interfere with bees that we need to pollinate what we eat, it gets worse all the time. The evidence grows stronger every year. Rising global temperatures caused Hurricane Katrina, Sandy, and Haiyan in the Philippines. I think I better say that again because I don't think anybody really understands what that meant. Overpopulation caused Katrina, Sandy, and Haiyan in the Philippines. That is what caused it. Overpopulation. Tornadoes touched down in February throughout the Midwest and America. And we've been seeing that. And I don't know about anyone else, but when I see someone coming back to their house and it's just leveled, I feel it. I really feel bad for them. And once in a while, you could understand that. But these tornadoes just keep coming. Many regions face extreme drought like California, while extremes express themselves all over the planet. Glaciers melt like with lightning speed in Asia, Greenland, and Alaska. Cities around the world house up to 36 million residents, such as Tokyo, Japan, that intensify air pollution and carbon footprint. Lung cancer rates rise while water pollution rates scream off the charts. Everyone breathes toxic air with every breath. That means all of us now. And the ocean warming while becoming more acidic, which translates in unlivable habitat for marine creatures that we try to eat. Essentially, human beings burn up the planet. That would be us. The United Nations Weather Agency Chief Michael Jared said ocean temperatures are rising fast and extreme weather events forecast by climate scientists showed climate change was inevitable for the coming centuries. There is no standstill in global warming. The year 2013 tied with 2007 as the sixth hottest year since 1850, when recording of annual figures began. The warming of our oceans has accelerated and at lower depths. This has always been kind of amazing to me, but energy in the form of heat goes into the ocean and it stays in the ocean. The ocean in certain areas becomes warmer. I think that's just amazing. We really don't want it to change that much. More than 90% of the excess energy trapped by greenhouse gases is stored in the oceans. Level of these greenhouse gases are at a record, meaning that our atmosphere and oceans will continue to warm for centuries to come. The laws of physics are non-negotiable, and they cannot be repealed. We humans set a course beyond our own understanding. In other words, we have so much to make up for. We tinker with the mechanism of climate and ecology beyond our capacity. We very well could become our own executioner, along with very much of our fellow travelers. Things like corals in the ocean, they're subject to being decimated by all these changes. Carbonic acid is what can really eat away at them. Scientists are calling for drastic measures to avert massive bleaching of the world's reefs. Scientists understand the Earth's oceans absorbed half of the anthropogenic or man-made CO2 since 1850. But research shows the introduction of massive amounts of CO2 into the seas alters water chemistry, which affects the life cycles of many marine organisms throughout the food chain. When carbon dioxide dissolves in the ocean, carbonic acid forms. This leads to higher acidity, which inhibits shell growth in marine animals and causes reproductive disorders in some fish. On the pH scale, which runs from 0 to 14, solutions with low numbers are considered acidic, and those with higher numbers are basic. 7 is neutral. Over the past 300 million years, ocean pH measured basic, averaging 8.2. Today it's at around 8.1, a drop of 1 pH units, representing a 25% increase in acidity over the past 2 centuries. During an overpopulation conference in Washington, D.C., I attended a lecture by Dr. Camilo Mora, professor of geography at the University of Hawaii. He said, when you look at the world ocean, there are few places that will be free of changes. Most will suffer the scientific effects of warming, acidification, and reduction in oxygen and productivity. The consequences of these co-occurring changes are massive, everything from species survival to abundance to range size to body size to species richness to ecosystems functioning are affected by changes in ocean biogeochemistry. Amazing. Humpback whales are among the many whales that will feed on krill, which will be subject to multiple climate stressors. If we humans continue our 24/7 carbonic footprint attack on Mother Nature, she will respond. For example, if the oceans become overly acidic, the krill that feeds endless numbers of creatures in our oceans may go extinct. If they die, the entire food chain dies. It's called cascading extinctions. As one creature in the chain dies off, everything that fed upon that creature dies off in a chain reaction that cascades into massive extinction rates for other dependent creatures. Extinction rates and species that are going extinct it is much worse than we even imagine. So what do we face? Humans add 80 million of our kind annually to our population. We add 1 billion every 12 years. Now that's the world population that I was referring to. We expect to increase from 7.2 billion to 10.1 billion within 36 years and continue to increase indefinitely because nobody's done anything to stop it. The United States expects to add 138 million within 36 years. That will increase our carbon footprint beyond measure. Should we accept our fate and keep heading down the same road? The result, it won't be pretty for our kids. You might think about that. Anytime you hear someone say, well, all I care about now is me, I'm okay. That's not all right. You need to think about people in the future. Solutions. World leaders must gather to speak about human population stabilization. We must address one child per woman families, because if we don't enact some methodical birth control measures quickly, we won't enjoy a planet that can support us. In fact, this planet will respond with deadly force with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. That kind of information is overwhelming. The results of the Fukushima nuclear power plant explosion has ended up in putting molecular leaking millions or possibly billions of gallons of radioactive toxic waste. That's it. And it is gone worldwide over all the oceans, everywhere. We won't know until the future how bad this has really meant for us. Here's a comment from a person that cares. Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect. That means everything. The radioactive waste enters into every living creature from Fukushima. in the Earth's oceans and contaminates their flesh. If you eat salmon, tuna, shrimp, and other marine creatures in 2013, you cannot help but absorb to some degree the radioactive contamination of Fukushima. For decades to come, as one writer put it, we are standing on the beach for this one. I think that's kind of an interesting way to put it. Radiation readings around tanks holding contaminated water at the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant have spiked by more than a fifth to their highest levels. Japan nuclear regulators said heightening concerns about the cleanup of the worst atomic disaster in almost 3 decades, said this scientist from Japan. The NRA later raised the severity of the initial leak from a level 1 anomaly to a level 3 serious incident to an international scale of 1 to 7 for radiation releases. There's a strong possibility that tanks also leaked or had leaked previously. So that's something that they probably should have got on top of that a long time ago. We have to worry about the impact on nearby groundwater. These tanks are not sturdy and have been a problem since they were constructed 2 years ago. That from someone that works with a Fukushima. Plastic, just to comment here, plastic and chemicals overflow to rivers around the world, yet humans continue polluting at breakneck speeds. What bothers me as a food-eating, water-drinking, and air-breathing human, being on this planet stems from the reality that we humans continue our mass contamination of our planet at breakneck speed. That means we aren't doing anything to stop it, to make it go the other way. If you look at the swirling radioactive plumes flying out of Japan on every ocean current, you'll see that Fukushima's radioactive water spread to every nook and cranny of every ocean in the world. Radiation levels around Japan's Fukushima nuclear plant are 18 times higher than previously thought. Japanese authorities have warned. Now here's a picture over in India. You can see Taj Mahal in the background. I can't possibly put this on the screen. India looks so beautiful in the distance, and we admire its beauty in the world. But look at what India does to its natural world. In other words, the world of insects and life and animals and all that. Many of the world's oceans and rivers look like this picture, and the picture looks terrible. What sinks to the bottom of the ocean causes death and destruction to ecosystems. We haven't the world leaders come together to form a 25-cent deposit return law for all plastic, glass, and metal containers to ensure such a pollution stop. Then it says, they don't care, and neither do the people of the world. He's here. As to Fukushima.
Hi, Richard. I'm here with Frosty.
Hello?
Yeah, Frosty, yes.
Turn it up just a little higher. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I'm not positive how clear you're going. Okay, Frosty?
Yes, speaking.
Oh, I'm sorry, we had another problem there. I guess I want to introduce you again.
Okay.
I've been moving papers around here because I've gone ahead about it, and I think I had just the things I wanted to talk to you about.
Okay.
I hope I didn't put them too far away. Well, maybe you can help me.
Okay.
Okay, so I've said that you have bicycled across the United States. As it turned out, it was either 8 or 9 times.
11.
11 times. So when you do that, what part of the United States do you do it? What middle of the United States, or you go to the north, or?
I've taken 11 separate routes across America, coast to coast, and from Canada to Mexico, or Mexico to Canada. And every journey has been different, and the routes have been different, and it's allowed me to cover, all of the United States on a bicycle. But I've also bicycled across 6 continents now, almost 100 countries, and I've also traveled on a bicycle from the Arctic and also into Antarctica, where I have also bicycled and camped in Antarctica. So I've had quite a journey for the last 40 years around the world. In addition, I've also scuba dived in all the oceans of the world, and I've gotten to see the long-term ramifications of the oceans and what's under the oceans and the plastics and the plastic debris, and also the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is one of the phenomenons of human-made disasters here in the 21st century.
That was it, the Pacific Ocean Garbage Patch.
That's
great. I went into it just a little bit, but I'd rather you talk more about it, because I don't think people realize how serious that is, and I'm not sure what they can do to stop about it, except if they had some way of getting rid of their credit cards, and if they had some way of not using plastic bags. I suppose that'd be a couple of things they could do.
Well, there's no question that the human race could stop the detrimental results of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. To give you a fill-in, it was really covered by scientists 20 years ago, and it wasn't until Oprah Winfrey 15 years ago ran a special on the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is between the 2 Pacific gyres. And those gyres, or gyres, however you want to call them, are giant swirling aspects of tides that create a giant patch of plastic anywhere from 30 to 60 feet deep, and in some places 90 feet deep, with 100 million tons of plastic. And some of the great statisticians on the planet project that human beings throw another 2.5 million pieces of plastic into the oceans every hour, 24/7, and that right now oceanographers like Julia Whitty from One Earth magazine showed where there's 46,000 pieces of plastic floating on every square mile of the Earth's ocean on average. And of course, there are trillions of pieces of plastic that are are sunk down below drift nets that are 40 and 50 miles long, which maintain their killing machine capacity for literally decades. And you also see millions of marine animals die, whether it's dolphins or the turtles, the grizzlies, and the greens, which I've seen in my scuba diving. You even go to the Pacific Ocean's most remote islands like the Galapagos, which I've also been diving and traveled throughout the Galapagos, and there's plastics on the beaches everywhere. I've been in plastic on some beaches, knee deep in plastic. Oh. So the million and the styrofoams, the plastics, the Bic lighters, the toothbrushes, the women's baby diapers, again, are all part of this Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is the size of Texas. And larger, in fact. But there's also the same kind of debris floating in the Arctic Ocean. It's certainly floating in the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean, and even into the Southern Oceans, because everything swirls and everything moves through this dynamic, watery transport system. And so we're doing tremendous damage. And one of the things that I have called for in my commentaries and columns on overpopulation and environment is that the human race needs to get together because what plastics are breaking down, they're breaking down to the micro level and now entering the food chain. And you're finding that the fish that humans are eating are also carrying this microscopic, not microscopic, but miniature pieces of plastic that have broken down that they've fed on, and it's now a part of their food. I mean, it's a part of their tissue. And so, all of humanity truly needs to get together internationally, all the leaders of the world, and create what I ask for is a no less than a 25-cent deposit return law in every country of the world that incentivizes the recycling of all plastics. Because if you just put a nickel, it doesn't do anything. A dime hardly touches anything. But if you put 25 cents on every piece of plastic, then every poor man and most even the rest of us will want to return that plastic, whatever it is. And if they don't return it, then there are an army, an armada of kids or poor people who would be picking up that plastic worldwide. Otherwise, we're going to continue to do extraordinary damage to our oceans and, of course, all of the ecosystems of the oceans. And when you start also combining the fact that we're warming the oceans with the carbon exhaust and also the acidification of the oceans by the carbon exhaust, then you're also watching the oceans die off and species extinction. One of the species extinctions right now is that the human race kills. This is documented, has been documented by Life magazine 25 years ago. I've got the copy on it. And Julia Whitty has also documented it in One Earth magazine, but we kill off 100 million sharks every year around the world. 100 million sharks. And so we're actually wrecking the ecosystem. So it's either we do something about it, or in the end we'll be the victims of our own folly.
What do you think we could do about the credit cards? Is there some way that they could be recycled by themselves, crushed into something useful? Or
well, as a matter of fact, I think at some point we're going to have to have a commensurate the deposit return on different plastics, make some more expensive than others. And if it means we have to have a $1 deposit return or a $10 deposit return on credit cards, we need to incentivize everyone through financial incentivization to return credit cards. Certainly make sure that every piece of plastic that anyone buys, because the world is buying plastic at an extraordinary rate. I mean into the billions and billions of different kinds of plastic products. And the only way that I know is to financially incentivize the return deposit program internationally. And if we don't, then all of life on this planet is going to pay a severe price, and ultimately we will pay the most severe price.
Just think, when we're out of oil, they won't be able to make plastic anymore.
Well, they actually can. They're now starting to work on corn and making plastic out of corn, and so and actually it's biodegradable plastics that they're starting to work on through corn production. So we are doing something, but until that comes into a full-fledged aspect of humanity, the only real way to solve it is by, again, the 25-cent or even $5 or $10 deposit return system to make sure that these plastics do not enter the natural world.
I can't think of how few people know about that.
Oh yeah, very few. I mean, probably less than 3 or 2% of the world's population not only doesn't know about it. The 2 to 3% know about it, but 97% don't know about it. They also don't know the ramifications of the environmental destruction that plastics, wreak on the natural world. And I mean, they actually destroy entire ecosystems because of what they do in the world. I mean, right now, the waved albatross on Midway Island, and I've actually had quite a few videos on it. The birds are dying because they eat plastic bottle caps, and there's billions of plastic bottle caps floating around in the oceans, and also sunk below in the oceans. And these birds have no idea what they are, so they eat them, and then they stuff their guts up, and then their young stuff their guts up, and then of course they die. And the waved albatross right now, one of the most magnificent birds, and I've seen them flying in the Galapagos Islands. They are literally on the endangered species list.
Yeah, it's really, you're right. There must be something that we can do, but I think education is all that part. There are just so many different things that we need to bring to everyone's attention.
Well, there's no question about that. We are now in the process of destroying the natural world. If you look at the Oxford University, Dr. Norman Myers, he did a 30-year study, and I've listened to his lectures, whereby the human race, which is now growing by 80 million net gain per year, it has a 7.3 billion number, which is more than double of what it was when I was in college at 3.5 billion. It's now 7.3 billion. It adds another billion every 12 years, and it's on its way to reaching somewhere around 10.1 billion by the mid-century, if not more. That's only 34 years from now. And the crisis is that its encroachment on habitat is extraordinary. And most people don't understand the deeply embedded consequences of that, because we're now killing off. It's called the sixth extinction session. That means there were 5 extinction sessions before ours that it's going on right now, and they were created, by the great fires, certainly the great asteroids that hit, and the ice ages that hit. And now we're into the 6th extinction session. And now the last, I think it was the last nuclear winter, essentially, that hit. About 97% of all life was destroyed. And out of that 3% that lived, humanity and everything that's on the planet right now proliferated. That was 65 million years ago, if I remember correctly. But right now, human beings are driving the 6th extinction session, and that's about 100 species per day. Here in the United States, it's around 250 per year. And to give folks just a little understanding of what's driving this encroachment species extinction rate, because the human race is adding 80 million net gain per year, those 80 million need to have housing, and they need to have food, and they need to have water, and they need to have land to live on, just like any other species. It needs habitat to survive. And the problem is that the human race is exploding beyond its carrying capacity, and it's pushing into the habitat of so many creatures. It's called ecological footprint. And ecological footprint means what it takes for one person to live a viable existence. Now, in some place like Ethiopia, the viable ecological footprint is 0.4 acres, 4/10 of an acre. And that means they can grow their food, and they can have their hut, and they have an outhouse, and they sustain themselves on 0.4 acres. But when all of these persons of the world immigrate to first world countries, the ecological footprint literally explodes. And in fact, when you get to a Western country like Canada or America or Europe or Australia, the ecological footprint is 25.4 acres. You can look that up on www.allspecies.org. I don't pull these numbers out of the air. In fact, they are in my latest book, which is titled America on the Brink, the next added 100 million Americans. But what that means is when a person reaches a first world country, then 25.4 acres must be destroyed in order to feed that person, to school that person, to house that person, to have roads for that person, and so forth. And that ecological footprint then if you take, let's just say, the United States within the next 30 years is going to add no less than 100 million people. Well, take 100 million times 25.4 acres, and that gives you 2.54 billion acres of land that must be destroyed, and that's wilderness that must be destroyed, and therefore the habitat. So the extinction rates in a country like the United States are going to multiply as we continue multiplying our sheer numbers. And can you imagine all over the globe that same ecological footprint impacting societies everywhere? So you can see that the consequences are grave, and they're immediate, and they're long-term, and they're devastating to the natural world.
A strong desire to keep having more people. I mean, more people want to keep having more people. Mm-hmm. It's such a strong desire. It's hard to get this information over to them and tell them, hey, you just can't do that anymore. You just have to slow down and back up, go the other way. We just got it to where we could just stop at this 7.2 billion or whatever. We just stop right now and then deal with getting it going the other way, but it's just growing like mad.
Well, it is. It's called exponential growth, and Dr. Al Bartlett, a friend of mine for 30 years in Boulder, Colorado, who was the professor of physics, renowned at the University of Colorado. He has you can go to www.albartlett.org for many of his great quotes. But some of the greatest quotes he ever said were, at what point on any level, international or national, is it good to add more people? How will it improve the climate? How will it improve the quality of life? How will it improve the standard of living? How will it improve the environment? And, of course, the answer is it won't. It will degrade it. And as the numbers go up, the quality of life and the natural environment will all degrade. And that's been shown by, many, many other top environmentalists and population experts out there. And unfortunately, though, the world doesn't listen. I mean, his incredible presentation he gave over 1,600 times all the way to the White House. And even with all the information, it's called Energy, Arithmetic, and Exponential Growth. That's about the title of it. You'll find the title right on his website. But no one listened, and he's been giving that thing. He gave it for well over 35 years that I knew of him. And so when somebody of his extraordinary voice and his extraordinary credentials didn't get listened to, then you can imagine somebody like me who doesn't have those kinds of credentials. I have a program that's very similar to his, and I've given it to colleges across the country. I've spoken to quite a few different organizations. I've tried to get on 60 Minutes. I've tried to get on Charlie Rose. I've tried to get on Matt Lauer at Today's Show and Good Morning America, and you name it. I've attempted to get on NPR. And there are very strong powers across the United States and the world, like the Vatican, like the Pope, who absolutely squash any kind of conversation on overpopulation. They certainly squash any conversation on birth control and family planning. That's right. Because they simply live in a different universe and a different paradigm that came out of the first century. And they can't unstick themselves. And yet, wherever you see ancient religions that advocate multiplying and go forth and take dominion, you then see more misery, more babies, and more ecological damage. And it's extraordinary in the third world, or we want to call it the developing world, but that's where those 80 million babies are coming from, net gain every year. And one thing, we're seeing all these mass migrations around the planet right now going into first world countries because they are starving in their own countries. one of the crises that not very many people understand is that Africa right now, which is really having just unbelievable immigration explosion out of its borders and into Europe and into America and into Canada and Australia, Africa is a 1.1 billion people right now. And they are predicted to reach 2 billion by 2050, which is only 34 years from now. And they're expected to explode to 4 billion before the end of this century. And so the line of refugees, the line of immigrants, the line of the desperate simply grows beyond anyone's understanding, so that no matter how much you import anyone into first world countries that have stable populations like the United States has had since 1970, and Europe's had since 1960, and Canada has had since 1970, there's no end to the line of refugees. And in fact, if you go to www.skil.org, Dr. Jack Alpert out of Stanford University, one of the brilliant mathematicians, shows that there is no way under the sun that we can sustain not only the 7.3 billion that are on this planet right now, but once the overloaders called overshoot happens at 10.1 billion or even 8 billion or 9 billion, the run-up to that number is going to be tragic, not only for the human race, but the rest of the world.
That's right. It's takes your breath away trying to think about it and wondering what to do.
Yeah, that's the tragedy. On my bicycle journeys around the world, I've already seen what's coming. I don't know if you know anything about outliers, but Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book about outliers. And outliers, some of them call the Cassandra syndrome. You can call Martin Luther King an outlier. You can call Susan B. Anthony outlier. You can call Eleanor Roosevelt an outlier. You could also call Jane Goodall an outlier. Anyone who goes out into the world and sees what's happening and attempts to do something to change the course of history toward a better outcome. And that's what I've been doing virtually the last 40 years, because I became an outlier back in my 20s when I bicycled through China back in 1984. And that was, through Asia, through India and Bangladesh. And once I moved through those areas, I was completely discombobulated with the amount of people stacked on each other, the extinction rates. The Ganges River and the Yangtze River, which I've been on, are both giant sewer pipes. They explode a 20,000 square mile dead zone at the mouth of each one of them, and hundreds of other rivers are just spewing poisons into the oceans 24/7 by the trillions and trillions of gallons. And of course, that's all going to come home to roost with our food systems being contaminated. And yet, with all of that nightmare going on in Africa, China adds about 8 million net gain per year, even at one child per family. It's called population momentum. And India, which has no one child per family and no birth control, they grow by 16 million net gain per year, and they will overtake China by 2050. And the total of them will be about 1.55 billion for India and about 1.5 billion for China. So that they alone, those two countries, will have over 3 billion people.
Incredible. They just don't.
Yeah, nobody understands what they're doing to themselves.
Never ask themselves, is there really room for all these people? I mean, for us to have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 kids, is there really room? And everybody thinks, well, I just have to keep reproducing ourselves. We just have to keep on and on and on. No, if they had a chance to think about it, and even people like us to keep inform as many people as we can about this problem. It's just those people where there are just so many of them. I've seen one of the pictures you sent. They're just heads like this, just endless. And I just think, are they really used to that being that many around themselves? Endless numbers.
That's true. They do get used to it, just like rats in a cage. But as you know, in the end, such things as a mass psychosis or you see all the aberrant behavior of compaction. If you notice all of the big cities around the world, you notice the horrific killings. You notice the raping of unfortunates. You see the crime on one another. You see the psychologically dispossessed. You see the things like future shock. And you see a loss of spirit. You see a loss of connection to the natural world. And when you get to places like Tokyo, which I've been in, or Hong Kong, which I've been in, or Beijing, which I've been in, or Sao Paulo, which I've traveled through, or Rio de Janeiro, and I mean, I've been through all the top cities. I mean, and some of these cities are like 36 million people. The magnification of the environmental damage is just beyond anyone's comprehension. And one of the things is, and it's really tragic, is that the producers and directors of 60 Minutes won't touch this, and neither will Charlie Rose. In fact, because I've tried for 15 years to get on those programs, and I certainly have the credentials and the experience and the literary excellence and also the ability to talk with an articulate mind. And yet there are powers that be, and the powers that be are the corporations that want endless growth, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce wants endless growth. And why? It's because the paradigm of capitalism absolutely demands endless growth, and that means endless population explosion. It's called exponential growth. And all of them, I don't know if anyone knows this term, it's called cognitive dissonance. Yeah. Cognitive dissonance is simply the intellectual denial of reality. Right. And that cognitive dissonance plays out across the globe. I mean, the Pope calls for more environmental care for the planet, yet he's the one that advocates for endless babies. And he admonishes any kind of birth control, and he admonishes any kind of family planning. And he actually just, in the end, the Pope himself advocates for the Darwin solution. And for anyone who appreciates the Darwin solution, I think it was Dr. Henry Kendall who said, if we don't bring about population stabilization gracefully, then nature will do it brutally and without mercy. Unquote.
That's right. I remember that. It's very, very important. And these television shows that you contacted, yep, they're going to realize their folly one of these days for not getting in on the necessity of keeping up the human race, so it can take care of itself when it because soon enough it's going to run out of oil, and people don't realize how this is going to affect things, and they have to have less people in order to just be going electric. All that they think there's plenty of oil right now. It certainly is not expensive. Gas is not expensive now. That doesn't mean we're not running out. Very soon.
Well, we're going to run out probably within the next 30 to 40 years. By mid-century, oil will be one of the great tragedies that happen to this planet, because it is the reason for all of the tractors creating all of the food, yep, and then all the transportation. But at some point within the next 30 or 40 years, it's a fact that oil will run out, and there is nothing on the horizon that will replace oil. And so all of us will be literally the 21st century victims. And I think it was Richard Heinberg who wrote Blackout, and he talked about the loss of non-renewable fuels. Yeah. And the crisis is, well, in fact, I could... James Woolsey, the U.S. director, said the United States cannot afford to wait for the next energy crisis to marshal its intellectual and industrial resources. our growing dependence on increasingly scarce Middle Eastern oil is a fool's game. There is no way for the rest of the world to win. Our losses may come from suddenly through war, steadily through price increases, agonizingly through developing nation poverty, and relentlessly through climate destabilization, or through all of the above, unquote. That's a pretty powerful statement, and that's exactly what we're facing.
Yeah. Okay, I know it's this thing where we have to do something or we're going to pay severely. It's going to really affect us down the road, shall we say.
Well, it certainly is, and he's not the only one. Walter Youngquist, who's one of the top, energy experts, he said, and I'm quoting here also, as we go from this happy hydrocarbon bubble we have reached now to a renewable energy resource, which we must do in this century, will the civil part of civilization survive? As we know, there is no way that alternative energy sources can supply the amount of per capita energy we enjoy now, much less for the 10 billion people expected by 2050. And energy is what keeps this game going. We are involved in a Faustian bargain, selling our economic souls for the luxurious life of the moment, but sooner or later the price has to be paid, unquote.
Yeah. That's right.
That's the facts, and we truly ignore them, and all of the world's leaders are ignoring them at the peril of future generations. But I see, we already lose 10 million children to starvation or starvation-related diseases right now, every year. That's year in and year out. According to Life magazine, it's Time magazine, and I've got the copy here in my office, 8 million adults starve to death every year. So that's 18 million starving to death. Can you imagine just 12 years from now when we add another billion people and we hit something around 8.5 billion? Can you imagine the starvation rates at that point in time? Because they're going to multiply, and they're going to, I suspect there'll be over 25 to 30 million every year will starve to death.
Frosty, I am certainly glad you called in. It just was been so informative on all this. I have a feeling we didn't get to some of the things we really wanted to get to, but I'm going to ask the crew to go ahead. I have to close out this part of the show.
Okay.
And to put up the play dates for this show. And also I want to remind everybody that next month is the Portland Roadster Show thing. So we'll certainly look forward to that. And I'll talk to you just a little later. Okay, Frosty?
That sounds good. And I can always, I'm doing a 30-part series right now. My Facebook page is Frosty Wooldridge, and I write for quite a few international and national news service websites. And this latest 30-part series, it's just titled "The Overpopulation, America's Overpopulation Predicament," and it comes onto my Facebook page. And I also have solutions. We can change the course of history. Such websites as capsweb.org, capsweb.org, with Joanne Weidman in California is tremendous. NumbersUSA.org with Roy Beck is extraordinary. You've got carryingcapacity.org with David Durham. So you don't have to sit here and become victims. You can be activists, and you can all become the next John Muir, the next Susan B. Anthony, the next Dr. Martin Luther King, and in your own way, make a difference, make a change for the positive. We must band together and literally change the course of history by our actions instead of just becoming victims.
the second part of this show, and it won't take me that long to introduce Shahid Hamid, who is going to talk about what.
Well, we're going to talk about Muslims in America, and we're going to talk about the current state of relationships with Muslims in America and the United States.
Okay.
Okay.
So who talks first?
So you want me to take first?
Sure.
Okay, first I'll begin. First, I'd like to thank Portland Community Media for always being available and dealing with issues that a lot of mainstream media is not dealing with. Today I have with me as my guest Imam Mikhail Hamid Shabazz, a very active and known entity here in the city of Portland. And we're going to just have a conversation more than an interview, if you will. We're going to talk about a lot of issues related to Muslims that's currently in the news and is of concern to us because we are Muslims. And we would invite, I hope that we have a period or a segment where we can invite phone calls from our listeners because, again, we want to have a conversation. We are expecting a guest coming. He's coming to the studio, Pastor Mondane, I believe, from the Celebration Tabernacle Church. Him and Imam Mikhail Shabazz did an interfaith meeting not too long ago that was very, very enlightening, very insightful. And maybe I can open our conversation tonight with asking Imam Mikhail Shabazz to describe some of the aspects of his talk at the Celebration Tabernacle Church and relate that to our audience. So, Brother Imam.
Okay.
First of all, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Yes.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. With the name Allah, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer, I witness there is none worthy of worship except Allah and Allah alone, and I witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. And our traditional greeting of peace, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Yes, the event that took place last month actually was spurred on by and initiated by Pastor E.D. Mondane, who's been a good friend of mine, I would say, for many years. He's a pastor in the community that I would say his ministry is a ministry through demonstration. He shows what he's going to do and then explains what he's doing, as opposed to the other way around, saying what he's going to do and then waiting to see it come to fruition. He and I have had an ongoing friendship and relationship over the years. I've watched him do many things in the community. He has a very good business sense, and he uses that business sense as a part of his ministry to give a quality of life to his parishioners and others in the community, and provide good services. And I would say at Poshine Restaurant, he provides a pretty good meal.
He does. He does as well.
Yes, indeed. So Pastor Mondane has been involved with a lot of things throughout the city, a lot of presentations at City Hall, and there were opportunities for engagement around the issues of Islamophobia and the fear, apprehension, as well as the misunderstandings that are prevalent in the environment today when it comes to Muslims, and the natural concern, I would say, that people have of what's going on when we see things like what happened in San Bernardino and in Paris and other places. And those things have caused, as well as the political climate, starting to cause some of America's citizens to be maligned and pointed out and put on the hot seat, if you will.
It has produced a climate of fear, if you will, actually.
Yes, it's a provocative climate, you know, a provocative climate that has produced some fear, but also it's producing a great deal of pushback because, you know, a lot of people are no longer reactionary, but more proactive and are not buying into everything that comes off the assembly line of those who are selling ideas and fear and other things like that. So Pastor Mandane called and said, look, Imam Shabazz, there is a need that he felt through his spirit, that there was a need to have an exposure, if you will, and a show of support specifically for the African American indigenous community of Muslims in this area, of which he's familiar with. You know, he's very familiar with our community and our works over the years, and also the general Muslim community, and to push back against this idea that could breed a lot of bigotry, a lot of hatred, and a lot of harm. So he felt that through his engagements and through his participation in many of the, I would say, high-profile meetings at City Hall and things that are going on at the City Club, he felt that there was a voice that was missing. And that voice was the voice of the community that he's a part of and the people that he know. So he wanted to make sure that through his ministry and through the Christian Muslim fellowship that we have and that others share in, that that perspective be inserted into the discourse, that the discourse wasn't complete without having everyone in the discourse. And sometimes you have to take a stand and create your own conversation when you want to do that. And that's what he did.
Where's some places that Muslims would go to worship or whatever? Are they around here? Or?
Yes, there are. As a matter of fact, there are mosques in the Portland area. There's there's a lot of them now. I mean, it seems like I mean, you have two in the inner northeast around the area where we live. The Muslim Community Center being the cornerstone, where the original masjid or mosque in this area, it is now under redevelopment, and it will be opening soon this year, reopening again after a fire. But you also have Masjid El Furqan, which is down on North Portland, MLK and Portland Boulevard, and Lombard, yes, yeah. Which is, and then you also have mosque in North Portland. You have them two on Burnside, in the Burnside area. They're all spread out throughout the city. So there's quite a population of Muslims. Very quiet and unassuming. So you both go right past sometime and never know what's going on.
I wonder. Yeah.
About how many Muslims would you say is located in the city of Portland?
I would say at this count, at this present time, I'm going to say it's got to be at least, given, and I say this based on the fast growth and the people that are moving in, taking advantage of the quality of life here. And when you look at our two seasons, the Eid al-Fitr and the Eid al-Adha, where we all gather, and when you look at the Oregon Convention Center almost being too small to hold us, I would say you're looking at somewhere around 30,000 Muslims, I believe, in the metropolitan area, Portland metropolitan area.
There seems to be sizable number. I think it's growing. It's
every
growing
day,
every year and every day.
Matter of fact, I think someone's getting off the plane now.
Probably are.
Yeah.
Well, if they are getting off the plane, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of reception they're going to get. And this is one of the reasons why we're doing this particular program, because and this political season seems to be one of the most racially and ethnically diverse election seasons that we've had in recent memory.
Yeah.
And a lot of it has been focused on Muslims and, of course, ISIS and the fear that has been generated by, like you say, San Bernardino and so forth. But I think what concerns me, and one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this particular program before our audience, is the denial of refugee status. The issue to begin with is the denial of refugee status to Muslims. The proposed denial of entry to Muslims from this point on.
How do you feel about that? What do you think about that?
Don't these refugees
refugees come from just everywhere?
Well, we're talking right now about at least one of the ones we're looking at is the Syrian refugees. And America really hasn't taken that many. I think it's only been about 25,000 or 2,000, I'm not sure, within the last couple of years, compared to the European countries that have been taking, Greece,
Yeah.
Germany, Austria, and a number of others. And there was some, as the man mentioned, some pushback by Donald Trump, to be more specific, about stopping Muslims from immigrating to the United States, and this is some of a concern because we have America is fundamentally a country of immigrants.
Mhm.
And to select a group of people that you say that you propose that be denied admission based on their religion is counter to everything that America stands for.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so this is of concern to us, and who knows where this is going to stop.
Well, looking at the position, and Donald Trump is not the only one that has taken that position. I think it's a position that's finding home in both Democrats and Republicans at certain levels. If you look at it from, just stand back and look at it, what are they saying? It seems to be, whether you agree or disagree with them in the position that they're taking, they're saying, it is being said, I'll put it that way, it is being said, let's not allow the refugees to come in from the areas where there's serious conflict going on presently because of the possibility of infiltrators coming in disguised as refugees, joining those ranks.
Right.
This is the
Interesting.
logic. This is the logic. Now, I'm not
Yeah.
saying that I'm agreeing with their position. I'm saying this is the logic.
Right.
Now, given the fact that what has been created in those areas, is so vile, and the sentiments of the common person in those areas that may be impacted by this problem that is first causing Europe a lot of problems. And knowing that there's a philosophical position and a position by ISIS and others to say, well, now here is our new tactic, and we want you to self-radicalize, and we want you to do whatever you can. We want you to fight Goliath with a stone. Go at it however you can. So I'm just putting this together, saying,
right.
here is what the logic is that they appear to be basing this on. Stop, let's vet the folks that are coming in
Right.
seriously before we just let people come in haste. This is what they're saying. But
Yeah.
we know that if you take that position, and identify a group of people as being suspect, we have a history of doing that. And we know that when you do that, when you identify, because at what point do you differentiate?
Exactly.
At what point do you differentiate?
Right.
So if you take that position politically in the backdrop of the hysteria that's also being whipped up, then all of a sudden you're stopping, you take an official position that all Muslims must stop at the gate. Now that we've got all Muslims stopped at the gate, now let's gather up all Muslims
Right.
and put them behind a gate.
Right.
Okay, that's the danger of
Right.
what's being taken place, and we saw that with the Japanese, we've seen that with the Native Americans, and we've seen that in Europe in
Right.
World War II. What happens?
Right.
And if you get the wrong kind of political figure with the power to like a McCarthy era type
Yeah,
of
right,
yes,
right.
then you can
Right.
create some serious problems
Right.
in the country for America's citizens.
And this is my point, because with the influx of Muslims here, some from very countries where there's war, like Somalia and so forth, we've had no problems. When you look at even in Europe, for the amount of refugees taken in, to the various countries, they've had no infiltrators really doing anything. So I'm just saying they're whipping up this hysteria,
Yeah.
and particularly in America, based on our value system,
Right.
the value system that we hold dear and project to the world. There's some problem with that, to me, in my estimation. One of the problems.
Well, you can't have it
for
both
us.
ways.
Absolutely.
You're going to either stand by those values and do what's prudent, of course, stand by those values, or you're not.
Right.
And it's either you either believe in what you're saying, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness,
Right.
and et cetera, or you don't.
7 years
Yes.
ago and so forth. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I understand, I do understand caution. I do understand procedure, but I thought we had procedures in place.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're dealing with the demonization of people based on their race
Mm-hmm.
or their religion or some other factor, then that's a very dangerous climate to create.
Right.
A very dangerous climate.
Right. I want to interject in here, Belly Ma'am, that let it be said that Portland has been a model, I think, in terms of being progressive and acceptance of Muslims, and the city council, and they didn't vote to go along with other states that are now stating that they will not admit any Muslims from any Muslims, period. Now, at first it was just Muslims from Syria and those war-torn areas, but now it's, with Donald Trump's recent proposal, that really is not getting too much support of stopping all Muslims, as you say, at the gate. So I just want to say that because Portland has refused to take that position. So
I think the city of Portland and the surrounding municipalities, because it would take all pretty much to come to that same conclusion and have a unified voice, is doing the right thing, because if you give in to fear and hysteria to the degree that you become paralyzed by it, then you're done. The boogeyman that you're running from have got you lockstep. You're locked down.
Right.
So you do the job of those who you're running from.
Right. And I think the president and Nikki Haley, who gave the Republican response to the president's State of the Union address, I think he emphasized some similar concerns and as well as Nikki Haley. She's a Republican, but she also is a immigrant and come from immigrant parents and so forth. And I think one of the things that they're trying to do is to keep us focused on our value systems, and not let this hysteria cause us to lose that. So I was just really, really pleased on that. But another thing I really wanted to say, and I invite your audience to call if they have questions or comments.
Oh, okay.
But one of the things that I just really want to just touch on briefly is because Imam Shabazz has been about this for 30 or 40, close to 40. Well, I'm not going to give your age out, Brother Imam.
Do you need to put the
I wanted to talk about
phone
Islam.
number on?
Yeah, put the phone number on. I want to talk about Islam itself. What ISIS and what them is doing in terms of people if they knew more about Islam itself, they know that a lot of this behavior is not Islamic. It's not justified in the Sunnah or the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and it's certainly not justified in terms of not intolerance to other religions, the intolerance to women and so forth, by the Quran. And this is something you've been teaching since I've been part of coming to the masjid.
In a couple of days. Been a
Couple of days,
yeah. A couple of days.
Right.
Well, Shahid, it's nothing is black and white any longer. What we have in the conflicts that we see around the world and and the circumstances that we are facing now globally, there's a beginning of everything, and there's a cause of everything. And certainly what we are viewing and what we're seeing, when you see the common people on the ground that are running, trying to get out of these areas, that are running, trying to get away from losing their lives at the hands of those who say we're Muslims. Okay, now there's Muslims killing Muslims. You know, these are people that are running, as well as some as Christians that are being slaughtered wholesale. So, absolutely correct. What we have is a polarization of thought created in a vacuum, or in a situation that has been created. Something has happened in those lands that have allowed the total disorder to take over. Now we have to look at that. Something has happened that have allowed total disorder to take over. And out of that disorder and chaos, you are finding these monstrous movements popping up. And it's the people that are on the ground that are now running to try to save their lives who are once again being victimized by the politics of religion, if you will, that's taking hold over their lives. And they are just simple, common people trying to live, eat, and pray and do the things that everyone wants to do and try to make it out of life and get into heaven. But then you have this politic and this geopolitical climate that's creating disorder, instability all over. And out of that instability and confusion and chaos is coming this platform for despotic rulers. And there's no order, and this is what we have. Anyone can stand up now and claim to be a leader and get a few followers to follow them and join in and begin to terrorize and brutalize across the globe. And weapons are plentiful, money seems to be plentiful, and it's might makes right. And even within the context of those so-called groups that we see, even among them, there's no unity. It's who decides to do what when. But there's been a created instability, instability.
And that is, I think, one of the things that gives us pause, is because if anything happens in the future, then you know, then the whole thing could escalate, you know, very, very, very dangerously. And I'm concerned about, you know, where's this sense of outrage, that, you know, why, and this is why I appreciate the collaboration you and Pastor Mundane demonstrated in terms of interfaith dialogue, conversation, because where's the sense of outrage in America about proposing that Muslims be restricted from coming into the country, restricted from fleeing these war-torn areas, restricted from fleeing starvation, you know, in the kind of compassionate attitudes that we hold dear, you know, where is the outrage at the very suggestion of these type of things? When you look at Donald Trump, for example, not picking on him, but he seems to have touched a nerve and found a niche. His poll
you have
numbers.
to put a coin in the cup of the one who's blowing the horn. So go ahead.
He is that type.
Yeah, where is the outrage coming from the common people? You know, where the outrage coming from other politicians? And as we approach the birthday of the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.,
can I ask about that?
coming up at Highland Church, I put in a plug for Ken Berry in his wonderful work at the Highland Church on January 18th at Highland Church on Northeast Gleason, 7600 Northeast Gleason. I mean, what would he say about this kind of behavior? So, you know, in terms of where's the outrage that we should see people demonstrating, like Pastor Mondane, and seeking to collaborate, bringing that collaboration you and him had, I thought was excellent. I just thought that was really, why aren't more churches, okay, I can say it, why aren't more churches doing it?
Well, I think that the opportunity is certainly present. And as far as outrage is concerned across the board, I think that there is a voice, there is a pushback. There are people around the country that are challenging this notion that Mr. Trump is championing. And the fact of the matter is, it appears that Mr. Trump, because he is independently wealthy and very powerful and has many friends also in properties, even in those areas of which he's asking people not to be able to come from, he seems to be speaking verbally and with the type of independent voice. First of all, he's not depending on anyone to fund his campaign, so he can say what he wants to say. You know what I mean? You can't pull your funds away from him. He doesn't have to be politically correct because he's got the bucks to do whatever he wants to do, and that's what he's flaunting. And it appears that because of the size of the crowds that he's gathering and his position in his party's polls, that he is actually speaking the concerns or the feelings of those who support him. He's saying what they want to say and haven't been able to say. They felt that many of them seem to have been silent, but now it's coming out that he's speaking. His mouth is speaking what's in their heart.
What's in their heart,
and so then they're putting
right.
their vote behind him. And if you look at what's happening up here in Burns, Oregon, where you've got a group of folks that have decided to defy the government and to do what they want to do, and look how they're being treated, and look how they're being handled, because there seems to be almost a subtle fear from a government level not to put too much pressure on certain segments of our society that have determined that they are willing to take arms up against their own country. And they don't label them. They call them militia, and they call them other things, patriots, and all these other names. But if you take that down to just a couple of notches and look at how we are facing problems right here in our own country with the way that the authorities, the courts, the police, the institutions, and others are dealing with the African American people and the Hispanics and poor people, particularly African Americans, in the judicial system, trial and execution on the street. So you've got a systemic situation here that is now the hypocrisy of it all has got to be dealt with, or the nation itself is at risk of losing itself.
Right, and the hypocrisy is a very, very good word, because I remember a couple of years ago when the Bagwan.
Well, I was just thinking about that. Those guys that are trying to take over up there, they're probably thinking, hey, we'll make another Bagwan here.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
They're not going to get away with that.
But the Bagwan, they wouldn't let get away with it as much as is coming in armed to the teeth as these militias, as this militia is demonstrating. I don't think they could have gotten away with that, and it's certainly not Muslims. If we had invaded some property and said that this property, we're going to take over this property or what have you, with armed resistance, I think the situation would be vastly different than what it is now.
So having said that, then do we need to look at, again, the root causes of what we're facing geopolitically, and the issue that is coming out of the Middle East and Africa and other places where the large Muslim populations are? Have the double standard been applied there as well? So we got these double standards.
Absolutely.
See, and these double standards are creating big problems, big problems. So you can't say that you are this and you are that on the one hand, and then turn around and do something differently and expect that it's going to be able to hold water forever.
Right.
No. So if you got a double standard of applying justice, a double standard of applying the law, a double standard of providing access to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, if you got a double standard, pretty soon there's going to be a conflict, and that standard is going to be challenged. So here we are facing right now this political season that we're in. Everyone is, I believe, on edge, watching what's happening. Again, history is the best teacher.
Yeah.
The Japanese people in this country are still here. Many of them are still alive, and their children are still here. They experienced the hysteria. They experienced what happens. It didn't happen to the Germans, by the way, but it happened to the Japanese.
Right.
Okay, what happens when you are considered an enemy inside the wire?
Or the Italians. It didn't happen.
See,
to
the
those
enemy
as well.
inside the wire. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I understand what happens when there's an enemy inside the wire or a perceived enemy inside the wire. When there's an enemy inside the wire, and if you're using that psychology, you drop munitions on yourself in order to get them. Okay, so if you look at what happened with the Japanese community, they were perceived as the enemy inside the wire. Rounded up, possessions taken. Mr. Trump, I have to go there because that's who's the champion of this idea, is a very rough in his presentation about everything, and he dismissed anything that disagrees with who he is and what he stands for.
Just another comment about the Japanese. You know, if you weren't here right then, during the 1941, December 7th, 41, on into the next one, if you weren't here, you have no idea what it felt like. It was a very specific feeling that Roosevelt couldn't shake, really.
Well, and if you look again at that example and what happened, and certainly America rebounded and said we were wrong and reparations, et cetera, but there was a lot of harm done to loyal citizens, to patriotic citizens, to people who had no skin in the game, if you will, against the country. In fact, they were anxious to go and defend the country. Absolutely. Do Muslims stand to face that same type of situation, the American Muslims or the Muslim American? Do we stand to face that type of hysteria when you have a potential political leader who will have the power and authority to actually execute the ideas that he's espousing? Well, that's a very alarming situation.
Well, to some degree, we have that now, particularly with the sisters who wearing their hijabs, being identified as Muslims, and they're walking around and they're feeling somewhat put upon, or they're feeling somewhat isolated from the general population, simply because of their dress, and their dress tells what their religious persuasion is.
Brother Shahid, if I may, the only reason I, as an individual, don't walk around with a 45 on my hip and a rifle in my hand and a grenade or two tied to my belt to defend my home and my family is because I believe that the law and order in society will do that on my behalf. I believe that there's a law and there's an order and there's a system that has been relegated to defend me so that and to protect my interests, so I don't have to on my own do that. But if the law and the order of society, if the law of the land gives me no protection, then I'm going to be a little bit nervous. Because
Right.
if a parent tells the child, this is the way we live, don't go outside these boundaries, then the children, those who are being subordinate, will act pretty much in line with that. Every now and then you're going to get off track and have to be brought back in. So I'm saying that as an analogy to say, if you have a political leader and a political party and a political climate that says to the common person out there who may not be capable of managing their own affairs, is that those people are now fair game because the law is no longer going to protect them, then what do you have? You have a situation where people feel like they can take the law into their own hands and go take them a few Muslims out when they want to, and slap a few of them around when they want to, because the law is on their side and the law has given them a tacit approval to say, yeah, well, keep them in check. Every citizen, keep them in check. That's a dangerous situation. And that's what I'm feeling that a lot of these people are starting to get into their mind when they attack people at these Trump rallies. Just attack them. Call them all kind of names.
But when you have Trump himself saying rough them up.
Because the parent is giving the example. I'm gonna use him as the parent.
as the parent,
He's giving the example, and the siblings, the children, are
Right.
following his example.
Right. Again, we'd like to invite you to call with our listeners and our viewers to call with your question and or comment for either one of us, and enjoying the conversation. And that's what I hope that we're able to have today, a conversation.
There.
A conversation about what's going on. When we look at Adolf Hitler, for example, again, changing the law, burning of the Reichstag, blame the Jews, blame the communists, and the law is on your side to do with them what you will. This is what happens. And but who was that said those of us who neglect to examine history are doomed to repeat it? And it seems like he's taking a lot of playbooks, a lot of play action plays out of Hitler's playbook to justify his attack on Mexican Americans, on the Latino American, Latino people, in terms of these are the people who are committing drug offenses. These are the people who are not working and coming across the border, and we build a wall. Yeah. And again, we see his poll numbers are rising. So that I just want for us to go on record as being against this type of thing and being aware and make our viewers aware of this climate, that this is Islamophobic climate that you talked about, and how it's creeping into the body politic.
It's not creeping into it. It's coming out of it. That's a big difference. It's coming out of it, and it is something that to take very, very serious. And that also says something to the responsibility of the rest of us as citizens. We have as much skin in the game as anybody to be involved politically, and to look at the candidates, to make sure that we're involved in the voting and political process, and that we vet our local, regional, and national leaders, and to make sure that we hold them accountable. Because this whole scheme, nothing can work unless everyone buys into it. Mm-hmm. So we have that responsibility, as well as having the responsibility to police and our own communities, and make sure that where we find a discrepancy in our belief system, and in our practices, and in our agreements with God and our own community and self, when we find a discrepancy and those misrepresenting that we stand firmly against any purported behaviors, attitudes, or language that justifies actions that are inconsistent with our belief system. We have that responsibility. We have it, and we have to execute it. So on both sides of the coin, we have to be engaged. We have to be very, very careful as to what's being proposed, what's being stated, and what's being created in the dark or in the open.
On the relationship between you and Pastor Mandalay, and this program that y'all put together, and the event that you put together, what would you like to see to come out of that event, and what would you like to see happen along the lines of collaboration between Muslims, Christians, and Jewish Americans? Because you had a Presbyterian, I believe, minister there as well.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the things that you would like to see happen?
Well, what I would like to see happen, and what is the continuation, because that was actually the continuation of relationships and work that have been going on. But we decided actually after that meeting to move that whole invitation forward, i.e., as you pointed out earlier, engaging more dialogue and discussion and points of agreement within the Muslim American as well as the Christian American communities. And again, in our neighborhoods, there's a lot of discussions going on all around the city, City Hall, different places. But there are some, I say, the eagles eat from the top of the tree and have their own way of flying, but it's down on the ground, the low-hanging fruit that needs to be harvested. So what I would like to see, and I talked to Pastor Monday about this, I said, let's take this and formalize this idea, this concept, so that we keep this, expand upon it. And he said that he agreed with that as long as I would take the lead. Because I guess so he threw it back at me. And I said, I agree that we would continue to work, not as a reaction, but as an action towards further engagement. Pastor Matt Hennessy of Vancouver Avenue Baptist Church, he actually was there as well. He came a little bit late because he had other commitments at his church, but he came and he lent his support. Rabbi Michael Kahan was invited. He was, in fact, we were going to have it at his synagogue, but he was unable to do so because of timing, because it came together relatively quickly. So there is a movement already, and it's a movement of reaching across the table, establishing bonds and relationships, and working towards a common good in the shared living space. So we're moving that forward.
That's right.
We're moving that forward,
That's the
regardless. We're moving that forward so that we're not caving in to fears and hysterias. And it is, in our opinion, more important to build on what we can build on, what's right in front of us, and continue to build on that. There are other pastors, Pastor Bethel, at Maranatha Church, and Pastor Haynes. I've had relationships and engagements and community events and activities and supporting with and for them. The Muslim Community Center, first of all, has always been literally the center of a community, in the center, and all of us have always had ties and involved with and concerned about what's happening in our community, what's happening in our city. Our whole modus operandi has been to make a contribution, whether it's against gangs or whether it's about economic development, whether it's about healthy birth initiatives, whether it's about anything that's going on with life. We've always positioned ourselves to be involved. We've never been an isolated and closed community. We've always been an open community. And many Muslims have come into Portland, literally. As a matter of fact, every mosque that is in Portland got its start, has to trace its roots back to being welcomed at the Muslim Community Center, and then getting their feet up under them, if you will, and then moving on and establishing life in America after they found out how to navigate the freedom. Okay, so that's an extended part of that. And I have to give credit to, and I want to be remiss about this, I have to give credit to my teacher, Imam Warith Dean Muhammad, who took our community, over a million of us, and brought us out of a developmental stage into a more comprehensive and universal state, and gave us mission. And we're still on mission. We're still on mission. We're still on mission, and we are not about to give up our share of American life, and we are not about to give up on our commitment to help reform and correct the thinking and the aspirations in America, because we see this Constitution of the United States as a compatible document with the Holy Quran itself. We see that, and I mean in a functional way. And one of the things that I feel needs to happen more than anything else is dialogue and cleaning up language, giving as lecturers and ministers and people of knowledge, is to put language in the environment that will allow people to come to different conclusions. Not take them to a conclusion, but create a language environment that allow people to come to a different conclusion. Okay. And when they get there on their own, they really appreciate it, because it was their gas money that got them there. Okay.
I think one of the comments that I hear most often is, how come the Muslims don't take a more active role in condemning people like ISIS, or they don't take a more active role in participating in the community life or the political life of the community? They don't take a more visible and active role. They have more little enclaves, so to speak, than a participatory push in the community.
I think if you look at it at different levels, Muslims do condemn at different levels. One way you condemn something is not being a part of it. You know, that's one way you can condemn something. You
Yeah.
just, I'm not going to support. I'm not going to be a part of that.
Yeah.
Muslims do speak out at various levels, but we don't necessarily control the venues of the discourse. You know, and the media and those who want to parade someone around, they pick and choose who they want to do all this representing. But there is great pushback in many cases around the country with Muslims. You know, we hear this, and why aren't you not engaged in this? Well, there's some legitimacy there. There's some legitimacy. As any mosque or organization should have a mission to be of service to its community. That's one of the ways that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, prayers and peace be upon the Prophet, pointed out to us that the value of a Muslim, or the standing, is how useful you are to your society. And that is something that we need to be willing to share more of, is the good life and the values that we have. But if you do an assessment and start going down the list of educators, business people, students, doctors, etc., you can see that we are an integral woven part of the society, and not necessarily an animated part that can be identified for doing this particular task. But if you start unraveling the community itself in a broad way and looking at the blanket, you'll see that we are a very integral part of society, and we are making great contributions, and always have made great contributions to move the society forward. Not to say that we can't and shouldn't do more. Where are our emphasis? As an African American, I work in the area of prisoners and jails, and as a chaplain, etc. So in that work, that has always been a part of our work also. A lot of our work has to do with, and I'm talking about the indigenous and the African American Muslim American, where we see our people as the product or the owner of the product that we have. The Prophet Muhammad said that the knowledge is the lost possession of the believer. So that the knowledge that I have belongs to anyone around me. And we go into these jails and we're seeing people reform their lives and come out and become productive citizens. Well, that don't get a lot of press and a lot of hand clapping. It certainly does to the young woman who marries a man who's got his life together and now is taking care of his children. You get a lot of hand clapping there, but it may not necessarily be seen in a big sense. We should, as any church or any synagogue, we should, as a faith community, be engaged and out front offering services that are rooted in our belief and our commitment that God has us here for a purpose. If He's got us here for a purpose, I don't believe in my heart that Allah or God will create good circumstances for anyone just for them. You know what I'm saying? Just for them. It's got to be there for somebody more than you. Why are you so important that it's just for you? So if what we have is so valuable and so redeeming and so have such saving forces in it, then we should be, I agree, more willing to share. Now I'm going to flip that question around because it's a good question. And I ask those who make that assessment and ask that question, why aren't, and they're right to say that, by the way, and that should also be applied equally across the board. And I say that particularly thinking about the police situation that we have in this country, and the issues of police brutality and the issue of police silence against the crimes that other policemen are doing.
Racial profiling.
I want to know, why aren't the good policemen and the good policewomen speaking out against and standing up against and opposing some of the crimes that have now got the polarization levels so wide and the trust so low between law enforcement and the community that it serves and protects, as well as the judiciary, the educational system. So those of us who say we are going to do right across the board, whether it's religious, political, educational, whatever we are, yeah, we have an obligation. And Allah tells us in the Quran, "O you who believe, stand up for what is right, even if it's against yourself." So we have to get involved.
Stand up for justice.
Oh,
Absolutely.
I want to thank both of you. This has really been an enlightening discourse. I mean, you're both just. I'm sure you really told the audience. So this is really a positive thing. And I want to thank our crew. Thank very much for everybody that's been working on the show. And also I want to remind you, and the second Wednesday of next month will be the Portland Roadster Show interview. And I hope you can turn in then. We should also have Miss Oregon on with that also. So I'm, again, want to thank Shahid.
Thank you so much. And I certainly want to thank E-Man Mikhail Shabazz for taking time out of his schedule to join us, and look forward to working with him on the areas that he has identified already, talked about already. So.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. It's good to be back in the station again.
Okay. You've been here before?
A couple times.
Sure. All right. Okay. Well, that's good. I think we're just about are getting cut off here. So that's it's been a very good show. We've had a very good time here.
Well, I do appreciate you sharing your venue with us, and on behalf of those of us, all of us